important to remember when we think about depictions of Native Americans, when it comes to comics, the genre remains, meaning that cowboy and Indian stories remain a huge part of what's on the newsstand throughout the latter part of the 20th century. So, with the explosion of superhero comics, the genre of cowboys and Indians does not go away. And in fact, there are a number of characters who remain today that were created in the 1940s that are still published in Marvel Comics or DC Comics. And in fact, the character Red Wolf is actually several different characters, but Red Wolf is important because he's really the first Native American superhero. He makes his first appearance in Avengers number 80 in September of 1970. He's coming in the midst of what can only be described as, and as you well know, a progressive characterization related to race. So, as we talked about, and as you read about and seen documentaries, characters like Black Panther, the Falcon, and Luke Cage really sort of define a kind of turn towards trying to provide more inclusive depictions of African Americans, starting really in 1966 and accelerating as we get into the Black Power movement of the 1970s. But the question remains, what about Native Americans? And with the introduction of Red Wolf, this is Marvel's attempt to sort of tell a different kind of story. And it's important to think about this first issue as sort of like laying the groundwork and really sort of fitting into a broader narrative. So in Avenger number 80, the story really opens with the Avengers debating what to do about a sort of looming threat. In this case, a superhero group called Scorpio, who are just basically villains who borrow from astrology. As they're having this discussion, the characters are thinking about what are we going to do. Iron Man's making the call that we need to do something. We have the power to do something. But Black Panther, who is a member of the Avenger at this time, does not agree. And in fact, in this frame, he said, before we rush off on a worldwide witch hunt looking for these bad guys, there are battles closer to home, just as vital, which must be fought and won. And Iron Man says, what battles do you mean? And this is a really interesting way for the writers at the time to sort of like, again, engage in a kind of allegory around social protests that's taking place on the streets around issues like the Vietnam War. But in particular, since they're introducing Red Wolf, they are very much reacting to the impact and discussion and activism connected to the American Indian movement, which starts really in 1968 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. As you can see here, the American Indian movement was an advocacy group that was seeking to address questions of sovereignty, leadership, and treaties. And AIM emerged very quickly after its founding in 1968 as a sort of premier voice for Native American rights. And part of the way that they did this was they staged a series of really very public demonstrations, occupations, confrontations in the early 70s that really raised consciousness and attention about Native American rights and concerns. And one of them in particular was especially impactful. This is when they seized Alcatraz. A group of Native Americans, about 89, including men, women, and children, seized Alcatraz, which at that time was no longer, it was like a decommissioned prison. And they did it to call attention to Native American suffering, right? At the time, when they took Alcatraz over, Native Americans had the highest level, one of the highest level of poverty in the United States, lower life expectancy from their white counterparts, and high suicide rates. All in all, from the beginning of the first person sort of like sneaking onto Alcatraz to the last people leading, their occupation lasted about 19 months. At the end, there was very few people, but it was about 19 months. Part of the reason it lasted so long is that at the time, the Nixon administration was trying to negotiate with them. And eventually, that negotiations fell down. But whether or not the negotiations are sort of secondary to the fact that the reality is that these events and others really brought a large amount of attention to the problems facing Native Americans. And that really sets the stage for Marvel to really think about Native American characters. So in my next video, I'll talk a little bit about the logic that I think we should associate with Marvel's turn towards creating a character like Red Wolf, and how we should situate that character in the broader comic landscape.